Take my land instead." Thomas McKenna's voice cut through the morning air, like a blade through leather. His hands raised as 200 Apache raiders formed a deadly circle around the small cabin, where Sarah Whitmore pressed her back against the wooden door, her swollen belly making every breath a struggle. The acrid smell of gunpowder hung in the air, from the warning shots that had shattered the dawn quiet, mixing with the sweet scent of prairie grass and the metallic tang of fear sweat on every man's brow. McKenna's weathered hands trembled slightly as he stepped forward. The creak of his gun belt, the only sound besides the restless stamping of painted ponies and the soft whimper from inside the cabin where Sarah clutched her late husband's rifle with white knuckles. Chief Red Bear, his face painted with white and black stripes, held up a blood-stained deed in his right hand, while his left gripped a cavalry saber still wet from the morning's work. "This paper says Whitmore land belongs to Apache Nation. Woman must go or die with baby inside her." The forged document fluttered in the wind, its black ink still fresh against the yellowed parchment. Nothing like the brown ink used in legitimate territorial registrations McKenna had seen filed at Fort Davidson. Behind Red Bear, warriors with Springfield rifles and painted war ponies waited for the signal that would turn the morning grass crimson. McKenna's boots crunched on scattered corn kernels from Sarah's overturned feed bucket as he moved closer to the cabin. "That deed's a fake, Red Bear. I've seen the real one in Judge Morrison's office. Brown ink, territorial seal, filed proper in 1871. "You lie, rancher." Red Bear's English came sharp and clear, learned from the missionary schools before the wars began. "This paper comes from Fort Commander himself." Sarah's voice came muffled through the cabin door, tight with pain and determination. "Thomas, don't you dare trade your spread for me. Your daughter needs that land." The mention of 16-year-old Mary McKenna sent a cold spike through Thomas's chest. His daughter waited at the main house, 3 miles east, unaware that her father might sign away 4 generations of McKenna cattle range to save a neighbor woman and her unborn child. The morning sun climbed higher, casting harsh shadows across the standoff, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang its liquid song, as if the world hadn't tilted toward violence. Red Bear dismounted with fluid grace, his moccasins silent on the packed earth. "Fort Commander says all settlers must go. Apache Nation reclaims stolen ground." He pulled a second document from his leather pouch, this one bearing what looked like an official military seal. Orders signed by Colonel Bradley himself. McKenna studied the papers from 10 feet away, his rancher's eye catching details that spoke of deception. The military seal sat crooked, pressed too hard into soft wax that had been heated recently. Real Army documents used harder wax that cracked clean, not the soft smearing he saw in this forgery. "Sarah," he called to the cabin, "when did Jim file his homestead claim?" Her answer came quickly, steadied by memory of happier times. "Spring of 71, just after we married. Brown ink on good paper, witnessed by 3 men at Fort Davidson." A warrior near the cabin's east corner shifted his rifle, sunlight glinting off the barrel as he found a clear shot through the single window. McKenna's jaw tightened, knowing that one nervous finger could end Sarah's story and her baby's future before the truth could surface. "My daughter Mary," McKenna said slowly, his words carrying across the circle of mounted warriors. "She's to be married come Sunday to your nephew, Joseph Red Hawk. You remember Joseph, Red Bear? Fought alongside your braves against the Comanche last winter." The chief's painted face remained stone, but something flickered in his dark eyes. "Joseph tells me of white girl with brave heart. Says she rides like Apache woman, shoots straight, speaks our tongue with respect. That's her. McKenna's voice softened with pride and desperation mixed. You kill Sarah Whitmore today. You make my daughter a widow before her wedding day. She'll never forgive the Apache Nation, never accept Joseph as husband. Blood between our families instead of marriage bonds. Red Bear's grip on the forged deed tightened, the paper crinkling in the morning breeze. Behind him, warriors exchanged glances, understanding that their chief faced a choice between territorial claims and tribal alliances that could shape decades of peace or war. From inside the cabin came a sharp gasp of pain, followed by Sarah's strained voice. Thomas, I think the baby's coming. The words hit the morning air like a thunderclap. Every warrior in the circle knew the sacred nature of birth, the Apache belief that killing a woman in labor brought 7 years of bad hunting and failed crops. Red Bear's face darkened as he realized his war party now faced spiritual consequences beyond military ones. McKenna seized the moment, his rancher's instincts reading the shift in tribal dynamics. You take my land, Red Bear, all of it. 4,000 acres of the finest grazing ground in the territory. But you let Sarah birth her child in peace, and you welcome Joseph to the family on Sunday as planned. Father, no. Mary McKenna's voice carried across the morning air as she rode hard from the east, her chestnut mare lathered with sweat and her long dark hair streaming behind her like a battle flag. She'd learned Apache riding techniques from Joseph, sitting her saddle with the same fluid grace that marked the warriors around the cabin. She reined up between her father and Red Bear, her green eyes flashing with the determination that had made Joseph Redhawk fall in love with her at first sight. Uncle Red Bear, she said in careful Apache, using the respectful term for a future family elder. My father offers his land, but I offer something more valuable. Red Bear studied the young woman who would soon marry into his family, noting the way she sat her horse without fear despite being surrounded by armed warriors. Speak your offer, daughter-to-be. Mary reached into her saddlebag and withdrew a leather portfolio bound with rawhide strings. The real deed to the Whitmore land and the real military orders from Fort Davidson. I rode there at dawn when I heard the war drums. Colonel Bradley wants to see you immediately about the forgeries someone's been selling to Apache bands across 3 territories. She untied the portfolio with steady hands, despite the rifle barrels now pointed in her direction from a dozen angles. The colonel knows who's been making fake papers, selling them to tribes, then claiming the land when settlers get killed or driven off. He's got warrants ready. The leather portfolio opened to reveal documents written in the familiar brown ink of legitimate territorial business. Red Bear's painted face went rigid as he compared the real papers to the forgeries in his hands, seeing the crude differences that spoke of deception and greed. Joseph taught me to read Apache symbols, Mary continued, her voice carrying the quiet strength that had impressed the young warrior. These fake papers have the wrong clan markings. Whoever made them doesn't know the difference between the symbols for temporary hunting rights and permanent land ownership. From the cabin came another sharp cry of pain, followed by Sarah's determined voice. Thomas, Mary, I can see the baby's head. This child wants to be born free, on land that's legally ours. Red Bear studied the real military orders, his weathered finger tracing the official seal that showed none of the crude irregularities of the forgery. The genuine document spoke of friendship treaties and shared grazing rights, not the wholesale land seizures described in the fake papers. Someone plays Apache Nation against white settlers. he said slowly, his English precise with controlled anger. Makes us kill innocent families while real enemies steals land from both peoples. McKenna nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. Land grabber waits for the smoke to clear, then files claims on property left empty by war. Gets rich while Apache and settlers bleed for nothing. A new voice cut through the morning tension, harsh and commanding. Nobody's filing claims on anything. Marcus Graves rode into view from the south, flanked by 6 hard-faced men wearing deputy badges that glinted in the climbing sun. His black stallion pranced with nervous energy as he surveyed the standoff, his cold eyes calculating odds and angles like a gambler reading a poker hand. Deputy Graves, McKenna said carefully, recognizing the territorial law officer who'd been filing suspicious land claims across 3 counties. Didn't expect to see you out this way. Graves smiled without warmth, his hand resting casually on his gun butt. Got word there might be trouble with Apache raiders. Came to restore order, protect innocent settlers from savage attacks. Mary's eyes narrowed as she studied the deputy's clean clothes and fresh horse, noting details that didn't match a man who'd ridden hard to respond to an emergency. Funny how you showed up so quick, Deputy Graves. Almost like you knew this was going to happen. Careful, girl, Graves warned, his voice carrying the weight of territorial authority. Wouldn't want to say something that might be considered interfering with official business. Red Bear's painted face showed new understanding as he looked from the forged deed to Deputy Graves, seeing connections that explained weeks of mysterious conflicts between Apache bands and settler families. You make papers. You start wars. You steal land while Apache fight white families. Graves laughed, a sound like stones grinding together. Prove it, Chief. My word against a bunch of savages and a hysterical girl who's been running with them. From inside the cabin, Sarah's voice rose in a mixture of pain and fierce joy. The baby's coming. Thomas, I can see. It's a girl. The sacred moment of birth cast its own protection over the gathering, making even Graves' deputies shift uncomfortably in their saddles. Apache warriors lowered their rifles slightly, honoring the spiritual significance of new life entering the world. Mary seized the moment, her voice carrying clearly across the circle. Deputy Graves, you're under arrest for forgery, inciting tribal warfare, and conspiracy to commit land fraud. Graves's laugh turned ugly. You got no authority here, girl. I'm the law in these parts. Not anymore. Colonel Bradley's voice boomed across the morning air as he rode up with a full cavalry patrol. Their blue uniforms dusty from hard riding, but their Springfield rifles clean and ready. Deputy Graves, you're relieved of duty pending investigation into forged documents and illegal land schemes. The colonel's weathered face showed the kind of anger that came from discovering betrayal within his own jurisdiction. We've been tracking fake Apache treaties and forged military orders for 6 months. Found your printing press in the back room of the Silver Dollar Saloon, along with enough evidence to hang you for treason. Graves's hand dropped toward his gun, but froze as Red Bear's warriors swung their rifles to cover him and his men. The Apache chief's painted face showed grim satisfaction at catching the real enemy who'd been playing tribes against settlers for profit. Joseph will be proud, Red Bear said to Mary in careful English. His woman shows wisdom of true Apache warrior, sees through lies to find truth. From the cabin came the thin, healthy cry of a newborn baby, followed by Sarah's exhausted but triumphant laughter. She's beautiful. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and lungs like a cavalry bugler. McKenna felt tears threaten his eyes as relief and joy warred with the tension of the past hour. Sarah, you did it. You brought new life into the world despite all this madness. Colonel Bradley dismounted and approached Red Bear with the formal respect due to a tribal leader. Chief, I apologize for the deception practiced by men wearing our uniforms. The real military orders establish shared grazing rights and peaceful coexistence, not the land seizures described in those forgeries. Red Bear nodded gravely, then turned to McKenna. Rancher, you offered your land for pregnant woman's life. Apache Nation remembers brave heart, even when offer not needed. Mary guided her horse closer to Joseph's uncle, her voice soft with the respect she'd learned from her future husband. Uncle Red Bear, will you honor us by witnessing our wedding ceremony on Sunday? Joseph wants Apache traditions mixed with white customs, binding our peoples in friendship. The chief's stern face softened as he looked at the young woman who'd risked everything to expose the truth and prevent a war based on lies. Joseph chooses well. Mary McKenna will make strong Apache wife, bear children who know both worlds. Deputy Graves made a sudden move toward his gun, but found himself facing 24 rifle barrels from cavalry and Apache alike. Colonel Bradley stepped forward, iron shackles ready in his hands. Marcus Graves, you're under arrest for impersonating federal officials, forging military documents, inciting warfare between United States citizens and tribal nations, and conspiracy to commit land fraud across territorial boundaries. The morning sun climbed higher as Graves and his men were secured with cavalry shackles, their scheme of profiting from artificial warfare finally exposed. Sarah's healthy baby cried from inside the cabin, while her mother recovered from the ordeal that had nearly cost both their lives. McKenna walked to the cabin door, his voice gentle with newfound hope. Sarah, it's safe to come out. The real laws here, and the Apache never were our enemies. The door opened slowly, revealing Sarah Whitmore with her newborn daughter wrapped in a clean quilt, her face pale but glowing with maternal pride. Red Bear approached respectfully, his painted features softened by the presence of new life. Apache Nation offers protection for mother and child, he said formally. This baby born during time of great truth-telling. She will grow up knowing Apache and white peoples as friends, not enemies. Mary dismounted and approached Sarah with the careful respect one woman showed another who'd endured the sacred ordeal of childbirth. Sarah, what will you name her? Sarah looked around at the faces gathered in the morning sunlight. McKenna's weathered kindness, Mary's fierce loyalty, Red Bear's newfound understanding, Colonel Bradley's military honor, and smiled through her exhaustion. Hope, she said simply. Her name is Hope Whitmore, born free on land that belongs to her by right, surrounded by people who chose truth over profit. Red Bear reached into his medicine pouch and withdrew a small silver ornament shaped like an eagle feather, its surface etched with Apache symbols for protection and long life. Gift for baby Hope, from Apache Nation. May she fly high and see truth from great distance. Colonel Bradley approached McKenna with official papers, bearing the brown ink of legitimate territorial business. Mr. McKenna, these are the real boundary agreements between Apache lands and settler homesteads. No conflicts, no seizures, just shared use of water rights and seasonal grazing. McKenna accepted the documents with hands that no longer trembled, reading the fair terms that promised peace instead of the warfare Graves had tried to instigate. Colonel, what happens to the land Graves was trying to steal? returns to rightful owners, whether Apache, settler, or territorial commons. Bradley replied. Justice means everyone gets what's legally theirs, not what someone can grab through violence and lies. Mary looked toward the eastern horizon where the McKenna ranch house waited, thinking of the wedding preparations that would now continue without the shadow of war hanging over them. Joseph's going to be so proud when he hears how Uncle Red Bear chose peace over the lies that could have destroyed everything. Red Bear followed her gaze, then turned to address both McKenna and Sarah. Sunday wedding will celebrate more than marriage between Joseph and Mary. Celebrates victory of truth over lies, friendship over hatred. Sarah shifted baby Hope in her arms, the infant's tiny fingers grasping at the morning sunlight that streamed through the clearing air. She'll grow up hearing this story, knowing how many people chose to do right when doing wrong would have been easier. Colonel Bradley supervised as his cavalry troopers loaded Graves and his men into a prison wagon for transport to territorial court, where federal judges would determine their fate. The forged documents went into evidence bags, their black ink already fading in the honest daylight. "McKenna," Bradley called, "you showed real courage today, offering your land to save a neighbor's life. That's the kind of character that builds strong territories." McKenna touched his hat brim respectfully, but his eyes stayed on Sarah and baby Hope, understanding that some victories came not from what you gained, but from what you chose to protect. "Colonel, just did what any decent man would do when innocent lives were at stake." Red Bear mounted his painted pony with fluid grace, his warriors forming up around him for the ride back to tribal lands that were now secure from Graves' schemes. "McKenna, Mary, we remember this day. Apache Nation has strong friends in your family." Mary reached out to clasp the chief's weathered hand, speaking carefully in Apache. "Uncle Red Bear, Joseph and I will name our first son Thomas, after my father who offered everything to save a friend." The chief's painted face broke into a rare smile, showing approval for the honor that would carry McKenna's courage into the next generation of Apache white relations. "Good name for brave boy. He will learn both people's ways, build bridges instead of walls." As the Apache warriors rode away toward their own lands, Sarah emerged fully from the cabin, baby Hope nestled securely in her arms. The morning's terror had given way to something better, the knowledge that neighbors would protect each other when danger threatened. "Thomas," Sarah said softly, "I know Jim would have wanted you to have his best stallion, the black one with the white blaze. Hope's going to need a good horse when she's old enough to ride, and that horse should come from the man who saved her life." McKenna felt his throat tighten with emotion, knowing that Jim Whitmore's stallion represented the finest breeding stock in 3 counties. "Sarah, that horse is worth more than my whole spread. You keep him for Hope's future." "No," Sarah said firmly, her voice carrying the strength that had brought her through childbirth under siege. "You offered your land for strangers. Time someone offered you something precious in return." Baby Hope stirred in her mother's arms, tiny eyes opening to see the morning sun painting everything golden across the peaceful valley that stretched toward the McKenna ranch. Her first sight of the world showed faces marked by kindness rather than hatred, hands extended in friendship rather than clenched around weapons. Colonel Bradley finished loading the last of Graves's evidence into cavalry saddlebags, preparing for the ride back to Fort Davidson, where justice would follow its proper course. "Folks, this valley's going to be safe now. Real law, real peace, real neighbors looking out for each other." Mary mounted her chestnut mare, her movements graceful with the Apache horsemanship Joseph had taught her during their courtship. "Sarah, you and Hope come to the wedding Sunday. Time this valley celebrated something joyful after all the trouble Graves tried to cause." Sarah smiled, exhaustion and relief mixing in her face as she looked down at her daughter's peaceful features. "We'll be there, both of us. Hope's first party, celebrating the people who made sure she'd have a future worth living." The morning sun climbed toward noon as the cavalry rode away. Their mission accomplished and justice served. McKenna helped Sarah back into her cabin, making sure she had everything needed for recovery while baby Hope slept in the handmade cradle Jim Whitmore had finished just days before his death. "Sarah," McKenna said quietly, standing in the doorway that had sheltered a woman in labor while armed men argued over forged papers outside, "you sure about that stallion? It's more generosity than any man deserves." Sarah settled into her rocking chair, baby Hope cradled against her chest, and smiled with the serene confidence of a woman who'd survived the worst and found people willing to die for her safety. "Thomas, you offered 4,000 acres to save 2 lives you barely knew. A horse seems like a small gift compared to that kind of heart." The sound of hoofbeats approached from the east, and Mary rode back into view, leading Jim Whitmore's black stallion on a rope halter. The magnificent animal pranced with nervous energy, his coat gleaming like polished obsidian in the climbing sun. "Father," Mary called, "Sarah's right about this horse. You earned him today and more besides." McKenna walked out to meet his daughter, understanding that the morning's events had changed more than just the legal ownership of valley lands. They'd proven that neighbors could become family. The truth was stronger than lies, and that courage shown in desperate moments created bonds that would last generations. "Mary," he said softly, "you make me proud, riding to Fort Davidson for those real documents. Joseph's getting a wife with the kind of sand that builds strong families." Mary dismounted and handed him the stallion's lead rope, her eyes bright with plans for Sunday's wedding and the years of peace that would follow. "Joseph always said the Apache measure people by what they do when everything's at stake. Today you showed them who Thomas McKenna really is." The black stallion nuzzled McKenna's weathered palm, accepting his new owner with the intelligence that marked superior breeding stock. Sarah watched from her cabin doorway, baby Hope sleeping peacefully in her arms, knowing that her daughter would grow up in a valley where people protected each other instead of fighting over lies. As the sun reached its zenith, casting short shadows across the peaceful homestead, McKenna understood that he'd lost nothing and gained everything. A neighbor's trust, his daughter's respect, and a community built on truth instead of the hatred that men like Graves tried to sow for profit. The wind carried the scent of prairie grass and wildflowers across the valley, mixing with the honest smell of horses and the distant sound of cattle lowing in pastures that would now be shared in peace between Apache and settler families. Baby Hope stirred in her mother's arms, her tiny hand reaching toward the sunlight that painted everything golden with promise. Don't forget to subscribe and consider giving a like to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.